You get the God message, and the A is a lesson in with the lesson, and the message is the restaurant. Soul in our hearts, and it's reaching all the people. We do this in the street and underneath the seat. Rather talk and talk, but the young ones want to walk. They're crawling in the dark, but my voice is a torch. Drink the milk, eat the meat, falling at the take a seat. The singer take a peek, everybody take a peek at the heart of the matter. He's the king of the kings. Married to the church, I got the Lord of the Rings. Gold streets where I'm dancing, Father got mansions. Beauty and God's image, wanted to fathom. You heard the story of growth. Hey, so it's time to go. Hey, hey, you heard the story of growth. Love and light, so it's time to go. Hey, you heard the story of growth. Love and light, so it's time to go.
Good evening, and welcome to Spelman Speaks, a series on Black Lives Matter and social justice. Please welcome the 10th president of Spelman College, Dr. Mary Smith Campbell.
I'm Mary Smith Campbell, and as the 10th president of Spelman College, I am so happy to welcome you to the second conversation in our Spelman Speaks series. How's everyone doing this evening? Let me know by entering your response in the Q&A section. I know it's certainly good to be here with you together to have this conversation. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Angela Farris-Watkins, the president of Spelman College's Faculty Council, and Dr. Cynthia Neal Spence, who among the many things she does at Spelman College, also leads our social justice fellows. They have worked very hard to put together a really spectacular series. The discussions in the Spelman Speaks series take a close look at the complex social web engineered by systemic and structural racism. As one of the nation's leading liberal arts college, a historically Black women's college, Spelman is perfectly positioned to offer commentary, insights, and analyses from scholars, students, activists, and thought leaders that address this current moment of social unrest. This discussion series creates a space where faculty, staff, students, and alumni join national and community experts in an effort to disentangle the suppressive tactics and ideological frames constructed by white supremacy. We examine the impact of institutionalized racism and sexism upon policies, practices, and procedures that govern the lives of diverse communities. The second in our Spelman Speaks series focuses on the criminal justice system and the systems that structurally inhibit fairness and true justice for Black citizens. We join the nation and the world in an outcry to reform criminal justice policies and practices that negatively impact the lives of Black, brown, and marginalized bodies. Our Spelman community painfully witnessed the unlawful use of deadly force against one of our own students, Tanaya Pilgrim, who is with us this evening. We continue to witness that force, as in the incident that just took place in Kenosha, Wisconsin. At Spelman, we prepare the women who will become future lawyers, judges, elected officials, and scholars. We're preparing our students to be the ones to choose to change the world in the corridors and chambers of our social justice system. As you will hear tonight, at Spelman, our students and faculty are already revealing and responding to the often invisible plight of women within correctional institutions throughout this country. With our Spelman Speaks series, we will begin to chart the plan of action we need to seek justice within the criminal justice system. Let me now introduce our moderator for this important conversation, Spelman alumna, Christine White, who is also a Spelman parent. Christine is an attorney, the deputy director of the Georgia Alliance for Progress, and a former prosecutor in Fulton County, Georgia. She is committed to advocating for inclusion, addressing inequality, and elevating civic engagement. Welcome, Christine, and thank you for moderating this discussion. We all look forward to an exciting conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. I am doubly excited to be moderating this panel, this really important conversation with my beloved Spelman community. I, as Dr. Campbell said, a Spelman alum. Seems like just a few years ago, I was walking through that art, and now I am a Spelman mom. I don't know how those two converged, but it's a beautiful thing. So I'm delighted to be here. And I am pleased that Spelman had the foresight and the insight to put on this lecture, Spelman Speaks, Examining Systemic Injustices Within the Criminal Justice System. Such an important topic, and we're going to dig right in. I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. And I want to just let everyone know that this should be an interactive conversation. So as thoughts come up, please feel free to put them in the chat so we can address your questions and your comments as they come up. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start with Dr. Jane Middlebrooks Morgan. Dr. Jane Morgan is a Spelman alum of class of 1984, and she is also a cardiologist at Piedmont Healthcare. Dr. Morgan is also the mother of journalist Omar Jimenez, who was arrested while covering the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis. We will now hold for a video, I think.
You can go ahead.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Morgan. Our next panelist is Dr. Julie B. Johnson. Dr. Johnson is a dance professor at Spelman and the co-director of the Georgia Incarceration Performance Project. This initiative is a cross-institutional endeavor with Spelman College and the University of Georgia librarians, archivists, students, professional artists, and incarcerated collaborators. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Johnson. We also have with us this evening Tanaya Pilgrim, a junior at Spelman College majoring in psychology. Earlier this summer, Tanaya was arrested in Atlanta when she and a friend, a Morehouse student, Messiah Young, tried to navigate protest traffic. And we are delighted to have with us attorney Ashley Adams, who's staff attorney for the Equal Justice Initiative. Prior to joining EJI, Adams was an assistant public defender and a district court supervisor for the Tuscaloosa County Public Defender's Office, where she represented indigent clients as a trial attorney. Welcome, Attorney Adams. Our fifth and final panelist is Judge Cassandra Clerk, who is a Fulton County Chief Magistrate Judge. Prior to becoming Chief Magistrate, Judge Kirk served as Fulton County Associate Juvenile Court Judge, where she spearheaded the establishment of Choices, Fulton County's first juvenile drug court, which was selected to participate in a nationwide learning collaborative. She is also the first judge in Georgia to become a certified child welfare law specialist. Welcome, Judge Kirk. So again, if you have any questions and thoughts as we navigate this, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will have an opportunity to answer your questions in the end. I will start with Dr. Julie B. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, please tell us a little bit about the Georgia Incarceration Project and also give us an idea of why you chose to focus on women in prison and what you expect your students and others to learn from the project.
Thank you. Yes, first I just want to say it's an honor to be a part of this conversation. So thank you to the organizers, Spelman Speaks. And yes, the Georgia Incarceration Performance Project is an archives to performance collaboration between Spelman and the University of Georgia that focuses on the history of incarceration and convict labor in this state. So together with all of the collaborators that you named in the intro, students and faculty, archivists, librarians, professional artists and designers, and incarcerated students enrolled in college courses at Georgia area prisons. Together, we conducted archival and embodied research to bring the history to life, to bridge past to present through dance and music and theater and spoken word and poetry and visual media. And so this was a devised creative process, which means that every single collaborator who engaged at different phases of the work over this 2-year process had a hand in shaping the project and taking it to the next phase, all the way through to the culminating production called By Our Hands. And so through their research and digging into the archives and into their own understanding their own selves as embodied archives, their questions and discoveries. So many stories were included in this work. Women and men, Black communities and white communities, prisons and guards, elected officials, and looking at the laws that gave birth to the carceral system that we have today. So we didn't set out with a specific end vision. We started with questions. And so every collaborator had the opportunity to dig into those questions and dig into their creative process. And so we wanted our students and others to know that arts are a form of research, rigorous research, that creative practice can help us more deeply understand ourselves, each other, the world around us, our relationship to social justice issues. Creative practice can create change starting with our own bodies that ripples out to our communities and then to society. So that's what we really started off wanting our students to understand, and what we all learned through the process was transformative.
That's amazing. Can you give us a sense of what your experience and all the things that you learned through your research about the criminal justice system, how did that shape your ideas and your thoughts around the Black Lives Matter movement?
The Black Lives Matter movement it's truly exciting, I think, because it's so multivalent. Folks can really enter it and engage with it from wherever they are at in their own process of decolonizing their own minds and doing the work to change their world and their communities. And I see the way that that's happening in the arts. Patrice Cullors, who is one of the co-founders of BLM and spoke during the first episode of Spelman Speaks, is also an artist. So I'm really excited about all the ways that that is happening. And so with our project, our students, could have open and honest conversations about race and racism and their relationship to it. For example, one of our co-directors works a lot with Augusto Boal techniques and power dynamics. And so we might do what's called a machine, an improvisation technique to think about these relationships and what comes up for us, and create a repetitive movement that everybody builds onto, so that we can then see a whole collective story and a collective experience made up of every single participant's individual experiences. It reveals things. And in digging into the archives, holding an actual archival object like a lock, feeling the weight of it, smelling the old metals, hearing the sound clicking, we can engage with all of our senses and see how that might evoke cultural memories connected to this history of incarceration, and how that makes us move or respond in ways that forever changes us. So those are just a glimpse of how this process, the Georgia Incarceration Performance Project, was so much about what the arts do, not just what they show. And I think that that's a really vital opportunity, to set in place in connection to something like the Black Lives Matter movement.
This is so important. I'm so glad that you are illuminating some of that for us, because, of course, there are limitations that the world puts on the arts that keep us from knowing its true depth and value. So I really appreciate your contribution in that way. I'd like to move on to you, Tanaya. If you don't mind, please share with us some of your experiences with Atlanta Police Department, and how this experience you had this spring, I think it was, how that experience really changed or confirmed how you think about policing in society and the use of force and deadly force by police officers.
Okay. So my experiences that happened actually this summer, I don't even know where to really begin. It was a very crazy experience, very unexpected and confusing, and it's still very confusing right now. And I still haven't even really learned how to process it or learn how to even understand what went on that night. It confirmed my beliefs in how policing was done, and it just really opened my eyes. And I already knew, and I was already very aware of how violent and abusive the policing system that we have is. But how when it happens, it's just so much like more eye-opening, and you just really see like this can happen to anyone. So yeah, it definitely confirmed my beliefs.
So has your experience informed how you see the Black Lives Matter movement, and if so, how?
I wouldn't really say so, because the way that I feel about the Black Lives Matter movement is the same way I've always felt about it. I think that it's very important because of the unity in it, and there's so much more power in numbers than as being an individual by yourself. So many people coming together for such an important cause is very amazing and very important. in the movement, in the changes that we need to see.
So now you have been involved in this Black Lives Matter movement. You have your thoughts and your ideas about what should come next. What do you think your role as a college student and the role of other college students should be in advocating for criminal justice policy changes?
So for college students and everyone really, I think it's very important that we continue to inform others about the cause. We continue to protest. We continue to, try to call and write into local leaders to try to, make a change. I think it's very important that, we vote. And like I said before, we just come together and go for the same cause.
Thank you, Tanaya. We appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Good talking to you. We're going to move on to Judge Cassandra Kirk. Judge Kirk, there are many people who believe that things that, like what happened to Tanaya, is a result of this idea that Black bodies are criminalized, that somehow they're inherently criminal. In your position as magistrate judge, you're responsible for administering justice. Do you believe that the perceptions about the criminality of Black and brown persons has led to a disproportionate number of the Black and brown persons that come before your court? And if so, what do you think can be done about this?
The research indicates, and I'd say based on Pew Institute research, is that Black and brown people are overcharged. I would say that Black and brown people are also over-policed, which means there is a very high probability that more Black and brown people will come into this community, will come into this system. And the criminal justice system, as we call it, really is a system that talks about what to do with people accused of crimes. It is not a system that is inherently one that talks about rehabilitation. It is a system that talks about what to do with those people that we believe we may be afraid of, regardless of what the crime is. And so I would start with saying, yes, Black and brown people are in communities that are over-policed. And I think it is easiest seen in this time of COVID. And I say over-policed in a way that is like, I'm not judging the police, because that's not what I'm here to do. But I would say in this time of COVID, what we have seen is there are police jurisdictions that have chosen not to arrest people accused of domestic violence. And so that for our system is something where we say, absolutely, you must separate those people in order to save and protect that victim, if only for a moment, because we have people that are saying, I am unsafe. I am so unsafe that I have called the police, and the officers have made a decision to come and simply hand out a citation. That is not something that has happened before COVID, at least once we realized that domestic violence was a true issue and was something that we should actually prosecute. And by we, I mean this system as a whole, because there was a period of time where the victim could say, I'm not interested, and the police would turn around. That has changed. But in this era of COVID, certain police entities, municipalities, have made the determination that based on their population, they're not sending anybody to jail. That's not something that we have seen, so that the number of people that are coming into the jail are inherently in those positions where their community, where their police have made the determination that jail is appropriate. And so it's kind of hard to answer your question in the fact that there are more police in Black and brown communities looking for more things to do with people in Black and brown communities. In order to answer your question, it said, what can be done about this? And my first gut is sensitivity training, bias training. But the truth is officers understanding the community they police. And I keep thinking about Elijah McClain, and that just breaks my heart so. And so understanding where they police, what it is their real role is in their job.
What do you think that their real role should be as police?
And so the question is, the badge says to protect and serve. And if it is to serve, I would say if we are really talking about serving your community, and I think that is what this role is, as opposed to policing from that end. And so it would be figuring out this person in this community, is this someone that is of this community? Is someone that the community would support? Is this something that I can support? Police have a lot of discretion when they first encounter someone. And the way our system is built is based on that police first encounter. And we have seen, I think video has shown, that police encounter different people differently. I was reading and researching some studies, and it was saying that even Black people, light skin, dark skin, there is a differentiation of fear in a level of policing that even determines what happens. And so I think if police understand what it is they are there to do, and if it is to serve, to truly serve, figure out what that community needs and meet that need.
Yeah, that's so real. I remember being taught in school and even in law school that police enforce the laws, but the truth of the matter is that they decide when, how, and who to enforce the laws against, right? So to your point, there's so much discretion there, and that discretion is often abused. So can you just give me a little bit about what you think about this idea of defunding the police?
So based on the fact that I am a judge, I will say that I'm constrained to provide my opinion. I will also say that if we are going along that role, that it is to protect and to serve, I would say that anything gets us closer to serving is absolutely what the model should look like. And so defunding is a misnomer. The question is, should there be CIT, so crisis intervention trained officers on every police force? My answer to that is yes. Our court here in Fulton County runs a misdemeanor mental health court. There are many people that, but for this court, would end up in that cycle of continuing to go to jail. If there are crisis intervention trained police officers in each jurisdiction, that reduces the number of opportunities for our police to have to act as enforcers on a mental health individual who truly just needs services. I was in a Miami-Dade, I was down in Miami-Dade and we were doing police ride-alongs. They have actually squads of people that they send out that are specifically trained to handle the mentally ill down there. And so they also have other systems that funnel the mentally ill into places that are not jail. And so for us, jail is not where the mentally ill should be. We have proven that time and time again. And places like Miami-Dade have broken that cycle and have really created places of safety for those individuals and for their families. Because when someone's in crisis, it's their family that calls because they really want the best for them. They want them to be safe. And sometimes that doesn't happen.
That's so important. Thank you so much. We appreciate your work and your service, Judge Kirk. I'm going to now turn to Dr. Jane Middlebrooks Morgan. Dr. Jane, your son is a professional reporter with one of the largest news organizations in the country. And he was not immune from racial profiling, even while he was doing his job. Tell us what your thoughts were when you learned that he had been arrested. Did you have a chance to talk to him about the police while he was growing up? Did you have the talk with him? And what were your thoughts about those conversations when you found out that he had been arrested?
Preparing for this panel today and doing some reflection, it brought to mind the book by Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility. And in it, she states that research attests to the disdain that whites have for African Americans, evident in the classroom to prison, to the mass incarcerations, to the white flight, which on research will say is triggered at 30%, but in reality is triggered at 7% of Black population in any neighborhood. She goes on in the book in a different passage to state that the protests for racism are demonstrated by white power because the whites are to choose the time, the place, the manner, and how protests should be done such that they can have the greatest comfort in relation to our protest. And so where is the ability for us to move our issues forward? Even further in the book, She states, maybe not shockingly to some, that for most white Americans, and she's speaking as a white American, they would feel no loss if all of us would disappear. There was really no loss to them for that. And I think all of those things are evident and collide when you look at the arrest of my son, Omar Jimenez, that morning, when he was simply doing his job. When you can stand there with press credentials, when you can stand there cloaked in your Northwestern pedigree. And when I say that because the Medill School of Journalism for Northwestern is the #1 journalism school in the United States. He's there with CNN. He's there with a cameraman with the camera rolling. He's live on television, and you can still be arrested right there in the moment without explanation. So on that morning, I was up watching him only because it was the first day of my vacation and he had asked me to be up, otherwise I would not have been up, 6 a.m. And I turn on the television, my bedroom is dark. I simply hit the remote to turn on the TV to have a relaxing morning of enjoying the fruit of my labor. Let me watch my son report this morning at 6 a.m. Right. And the first scene that I see is, it seems to me, I wasn't clear, that he was being placed in handcuffs. That was the initial scene that was coming into my bedroom. He had on a face mask. And I thought to myself, wow, that looks a lot like Omar, but that can't be him. Let me see what's happening. I hear him ask, why is he being arrested? I hear another voice say, sir, we're live on air. I hear Omar say something else. I'm recognizing his voice, but I'm not processing it. But at this point, I'm sitting straight up in the bed, and then I watch them walk my son away in handcuffs. And so as you can imagine, what are you thinking? You know, obviously the most dangerous time for Black men, especially, to be in police custody is in between the time that they are placed under arrest and actually arrive at the police precinct, that unknown time where people die, where they suddenly commit suicide in the back of the police car, or they in the hospital for, you know, somehow they fell out of the car, all kinds of bizarre reasons. And so I really was panicked. And it was a very panicked time. I began to make phone calls, and, you know, we should not have to live like this. We should not have to live in two Americas. We move forward in a way that we try to be culturally relevant. We try to work within a penal system that, quite frankly, is not broken. It works exactly the way it was built to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how we have to navigate our world. And so I've heard a lot of questions about Black Lives Matter. I think Black Lives Matter is incredibly important. You asked me what I said to Omar. I'm skipping over many details, but when he was released, he gave me a call. And the only thing I could say to him was, I wondered if I was going to be another one of those Black mothers who was going to have to bury their son after he had been arrested. Mm-hmm. And we should not have to live that way.
No.
So that, you know, sort of that's my story. Yeah. Of where we are. I'm trying to read to sort of understand the anger and the hatred of whites towards Black, to understand how their whiteness really is defined by Black inferiority. If Blacks are not inferior, their whiteness cannot be as innocent and as pure. And so in many ways, their identity is predicated on our inferiority.
I'm so sorry that you had to experience that and that your son had to experience that. Before we move on, I want to make sure, and you said that you spoke with your son, he was safe.
Yes.
That's great. That's what is most important. But there's still so much work to do to ensure that one day when he has sons, he doesn't have to have the same fears that you have.
George Floyd was not safe. I mean, we can name all kinds of people. They were not safe, but he was safe. He was lucky.
He was lucky.
He was lucky.
Well, thank God for that. I thank you for sharing your story with us. I want to ask you, Attorney Adams, about your work at the Equal Justice Initiative. Listening to the other panelists and the things that you've heard today, what do you think is the most important reality of this system of inequalities that live within the criminal justice system that we should be focusing on now in this history, in this moment in our history?
What I think we should be focusing on now, given all that is going on, is beginning to educate people about our country's history of racial injustice. I think it all goes back to race and racism. At EJI, our goal is to educate as many people as possible about the United States history of racial injustice. We believe that history of racial injustice is based on a false narrative that Black people are inferior, as Ms. Morgan pointed out. And that false narrative has been used throughout our history to justify chattel slavery, racial terror lynching, segregation, and currently the racial and the economic inequities that we see today, such as if you are a Black defendant and you are accused of capital murder and convicted of capital murder, if your victim is white, you are more likely to be sentenced to death than a white person with a Black victim. That narrative also is a part of all of our other institutions, from healthcare to education. This narrative is the reason why white people think it's okay to flout a pandemic disease by not wearing a mask, a disease that's disproportionately killing Black, brown, and Native people. It's also the reason that affluent white parents think it's okay to oppose rezoning of their schools so that Black and brown children can't attend the same schools that their children attend. We believe that by educating people on the racism, the racist history of our country, that we will begin to heal and move forward to building a society that doesn't make decisions based in bigotry. Until we educate people about that, until people begin to learn about that false narrative and our history of racial injustice, the structures and the structures that we see and the violations that we currently see will continue.
I am encouraged by your grasp of the issue. It is very discouraging, though, knowing and hearing all of what we've heard from our panelists. The Equal Justice Initiative does an incredible work defending folks accused of crimes. Can you just give us a quick question, a quick answer to what you think, which part of our system, our police, our courts, correctional system, is in need of the most reform? Where should we start?
We should start and I'm thinking of like an emergency room. Where we should start immediately is corrections. And I say that because of the current conditions of our prisons and our jails. Currently, the United States imprisons the most people in the world. We are number one. It's not something that we should be proud of being number one, but we currently incarcerate over 2.2 million people, which is about 655 people per 100,000. The countries that come after us in that are China and Russia. And due to this false narrative that I talked about earlier, this false narrative of racial inferiority of Black people and brown people and Native people, Black people are disproportionately represented in our prison numbers. Currently, Black and Latinx people make up 56% of the prison population. And that's not because we are inherently more dangerous. We're not. As Judge Kirk stated, this is a result of over-policing in our society, and on the other end, excessive sentencing. And what that has led to is overcrowding in our prisons and conditions, horrific conditions that no one should live in. Alabama, where I practice at, where our office is currently has the most violent prisons in the United States. We are not the only prisons that have violence. We just have the most violent. The Department of Justice has done 2 separate reports that you can find on our website and find online that are urging our state actors to take action about the level of violence in our prisons. Basic human needs are not being met. People don't have clean uniforms. They don't have edible food. They don't have basic health care. They don't have air conditioning. And this causes agitation and irritation, and the violence not only comes from other incarcerated people violating other incarcerated people, but also from staff, right. Guards. And I think that because of these current conditions, that is the reason why I would immediately go to corrections. And I think if you begin with decarceration, which is releasing large numbers of people and providing them with the tools that they need for reentry, that's important. Providing people with living wage jobs, adequate housing, traditional health care that we think of, and also mental health care. People need to be able to process with a professional the things that they have just gone through in prison. And I think once you decarcerate and provide people with the tools that they need, that will provide people with the tools that they need to not reoffend. It will also put them in a place where police officers don't really have an excuse to engage people. You decrease homelessness, you decrease drug use and addiction, which are reasons that police officers often use to interact and engage people. In prison, when you decarcerate, you get rid of the overcrowding. You have people no longer piled on top of one another in unair-conditioned places. That also gives you more resources to bring in food that's nutritious and edible, to bring in medical teams that can adequately focus on the number of people that are in the prisons, and the staff won't be overwhelmed having to watch a prison that is operating at twice its capacity.
That is so important. I had the privilege to take my daughter, my sister, and I to the EJI Museum and Memorial last summer before COVID, or I think it was actually earlier this year, with her school. And it was, what struck me was the explanation of how during enslavement, there were places where they would put enslaved people that were no longer marketable. So just these folks who they didn't know what to do with, like used car sales lots, they would just have people in these populations incarcerated, and those places became our jails. And so what happened was the society did not have a use for those people, and we continue to not have a use for certain people in our communities, the homeless, the drug addicted, the mentally ill, and we continue to put them in our carceral system. And when you understand that history, it becomes so clear to you why in America we have this exploded incarceration rate. And so I encourage anyone who has not been there, as soon as we have the opportunity, to go visit, to go and go to the memorial and the museum, because it's so important. I have like a lightning round of questions, really quick, in like 30 seconds or less. If you could tell me, panelists, and we can start with anyone, what how you think the Black Lives Matter movement is or is not, or what role does it play in changing our criminal justice system? Really quickly, anyone who wants to answer, 30 seconds or less.
I'll start. So I'd say that the Black Lives Movement has been around since the 60s. I think we called it something different back in the 60s. In the 60s, we were worried about mobility, decency, and acceptability. And so right now, what we're worried about is affordability, quality of education, criminal justice reform, and equity, economic equity.
Great answer. Thank you so much. Anybody else have a quick answer to the role that the Black Lives Matter movement plays in changing our criminal justice system?
Just that it amplifies the stories of brutality and of people's experiences, and that's so vital for everybody to have access to those perspectives and experiences.
And from my perspective, obviously as a physician, I think it begins to bring visibility to the healthcare inequities. Even as we saw in George Floyd, and I was surprised that the healthcare system was let off on that. As the paramedics arrived, no one began CPR, even though, as far as I could tell on the video, he had been unconscious for maybe less than 1 minute, 30 seconds, so well within the time of revivability. And yet no one attempted any type of CPR. In fact, he was loaded into the ambulance as I watched with his hands still handcuffed behind him. What is the culpability of the healthcare system that is also steeped in racism, that arrives to a scene where you are sworn to help and improve the lives of people, and you do not even begin basic CPR. And so I think as we begin to look at some of these things with Black Lives Matter, the healthcare system is certainly a part of it. It's the reason that the opioid crisis is only in mostly within white America and not Black America because of the white innocence and the Black lack of innocence. And so opioids are prescribed more to white people because they are perceived to have more pain, and we are perceived to have less pain. And so all of these are multiple things that will add up, and I think the Black Lives Matter movement is the key part of that.
Yeah, and it's key to say that the perceived innocence of white folks and the perceived perceived culpability of Black folks. We have a question from the audience for Tanaya, and the question is, how has your experience with the police this spring, how has that motivated you to explore your degree in psychology, or impacted your decision to explore your degree?
It motivates me more to explore my degree because I already was very interested in like how things like abuse and things like that affect someone's brain. So after this happened to me, it was a very traumatic experience. So it made me want to dive deeper into how certain traumas change how a person is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. A question for Judge Kirk. Could you provide us some insight on the role of the DA and their power, as well as the agency that citizens have to change DA's roles and that power? Really key as we move into this season that we're in right now. And Dr. Cassandra, I think you're muted.
Thank you. And so voting is how you have the ability to change who your DA is. That is the only way. I know there are people that are looking to upend and I guess get rid of the DAs down in Dublin and South Georgia, and they will have a long road to hoe. Election is the way to get rid of who the DA is and what the DA does, and those policies that come with that elected position. The question was, what does the DA do? The district attorney in most counties and in Fulton is the person that prosecutes the felonies. In some counties, there is not a state court, and so the DA does felonies as well as misdemeanors, but it is the DA that makes the charging decision as to what cases will make it past the police stage into coming into court, and actually for which an accused person must be responsible for in terms of standing for a plea and arraignment, moving to the next levels, and ultimately making it to an opportunity for them to take a plea or for them to go to trial. And so it is the district attorney and his charging documents and his or her philosophy that makes a decision as to which cases are charged and how fast they get there.
Yeah. I am a former prosecutor. I was assistant district attorney with Fulton County. And though I have a very robust sense of justice and in the injustice of our carceral system, I was advised by some folks who are in the system, some judges who are in Fulton County, that it was important to also be prosecutors. And the idea of what a prosecutor can be has changed recently. The idea of having progressive prosecutors is primarily a new idea, but I knew intrinsically as a prosecutor that I wanted to be there to ensure that we were not prosecuting folks for things that shouldn't even be taken to court. And some discretion there, but primarily the prosecutor, the DA that we elect, is the one who makes the decisions or develops the process for the decisions that will be made about who gets charged and how they are charged and who is held accountable, whether that be police officers or accused folks. I wanted to ask one more question about the police, and this is a question that comes from the audience. We had several questions. We may not be able to get to them all, but I think that there's two questions that are similar. What can we do about the police to mitigate some of these injustices that we have in the incarceration system, other than just sort of the hands-on training? And I think that this also lends to a question that someone else has about what other policing systems look like maybe in other countries, such that there are lower rates of incarceration in other countries. What can we change about our system based on sort of a collective global view?
Well, one thing I think that we can do to change and try to mitigate some of the things happening, I think a very important first step would to be holding the police accountable for their actions and making sure that they have to take responsibility for the wrongdoings that they do. Mm-hmm. I think there will be less run-ins if they have to be held accountable like everyone else.
Mm-hmm. And certainly everywhere in not just the United States and the Western Hemisphere where there's been colonization, the society struggle with this. America probably has the greatest degree of struggling with this white-black issue. But as we move towards this election, we certainly, I think someone else has already talked about it, we have to vote and vote seriously for people who represent our interests and represent the interest of all peoples of America. And we begin there with taking our right to vote very seriously and trying to move people in who can really be good leaders and good representatives.
Dr. Morgan, while we have you, we have a CNN employee who has asked a question about whether or not you were ever contacted by the management or the producers about your son's incident with the police.
So the CEO of CNN did call me. I did, however, call multiple times to CNN leaving messages. It's funny when your children are adults, you never think, well, if something happens to them, I don't know any of their coworkers. And so there I was at 6 a.m. I didn't know any coworkers. And I was just blindly calling numbers at CNN, leaving messages, including on the CNN tip line. I left a tip, 24-hour tip, that I was Omar's mother. I needed somebody to call me. That was the tip. So the CEO actually of CNN did call me, and he only said, I got your messages and I want you to know we are working to free him, and I'm speaking with the governor. So yes, the top person at CNN for the CNN employee did eventually give me a call.
Thank you. We have another question from a student that we think is really important, and if anyone has an answer to this or some suggestions, how students can safely navigate being a part of the Black Lives Matter movement and making their stand against injustice in the carceral system. What are some tips on how they can do that safely?
I would say first familiarize yourself with their website. There is a wealth of information that they provide with all sorts of ways to engage. There's so many different roles that that folks can take in activism and social justice. So that's one. And there's definitely specific tips if you're going to, protest and be in the streets. So I would say definitely confer with the website. And I also want to highlight or echo what Attorney Adams had said earlier about the importance of educating people about racial injustice. I think it's really important, to kind of go through that process of understanding the history and how we got here today as a step to take in activism and in engaging in these things. And so I'm always going to advocate for the arts as a way to do that. And with the Georgia Incarceration Performance Project, we dug into the archives to find things that we animated the Black codes and recreated historically accurate things from history, like the Manly Cage, which is a prison jail car that transported prisoners. I mean, it's something different when you see it and are confronted with those things, confronted with that history and making visceral connections. So there's so many things that the arts does to prepare us for making change. So,
yeah, that's so important. And it is aligned directly to learning about this history of racial oppression in the United States, systemic racial oppression in the United States. There's so many ways to share that, and the arts is one great way. I will say for myself as a mother and as a mother of a college student now, when my daughter wanted to go protest, I work with attorneys, I work with nonprofits, I work with some ACLU folks who were out there and they had on yellow signs that said legal observer. And so the ACLU, in addition to the Black Lives Matter websites, are great places for resources about what to do, how to dress when you're protesting, things that can keep you safe, including making sure that someone has your location on your phone, that you have, that you're hydrated, that you have on comfortable clothes that you would be willing to be in a jail cell in. Not heels, things that are sneakers and that can layers that can go from hot to cold, and that you have snacks, that you stay hydrated and that you stay nourished. And folks, there's a thing on your phone that allows you to share your location. Things like that, practical things you have to consider when you're going out, particularly if you're protesting, that you might be arrested, and you need to take those precautions and prepare in such a way. Let folks know where you are by just texting them that you're safe throughout the day. So those are some of the things that I was advised by the folks that I work with that were actively getting folks out of jail when we did have some uprising and some protests. I want to leave with this one thought. We are still seeing Breonna Taylor, who has not. There's been no action to arrest the police charged in her murder. And so one of the questions that we received from an audience member is, what can we do? What should we be doing to show our disdain and to demand justice for Breonna Taylor in this time, in this moment? What can we do now and continue to do? Does anyone have any thoughts on that from our panel?
I would continue to say her name. There have been some things in the news and on social media lately that have seemed a little strange as far as keeping her keeping her name at the top here. But I would say continue to say her name. I would call for and this goes back to being an active part of your community, I would, pay attention to who I'm voting for, who's involved in my community, and because those are the people that make the decisions that lead to tragedies such as what happened to Breonna Taylor. So think about, your chief of police, your sheriff. Those are the people that usually sign off on the warrants that lead to those raids. So those are important offices to think about as we go into this election season, but also, just paying attention to, how those candidates and how those actors think about policing, how they approach policing. Are they okay with the police being almost an arm of the military? Which is an issue that I think a lot of folks still don't realize is how militarized the police have become. But that would be my advice, is to continue to say her name, continue to call for the accountability of the officers, talk with legislative actors, people in your state legislatures about qualified immunity, which is a law that allows police to be shielded from taking accountability for the deaths and the brutality that they inflict upon people.
That is excellent advice. I'm so glad that you made the connection up and down the ballot. We can't afford to not know every single person that is on our ballot. And now with mail-in voting, you can look at your ballot before you and have some time to do some research before you cast your ballot. And so that is an incredible opportunity that I think we haven't had when we were just going to the ballot election day and sort of looking and being surprised by some folks that were on the ballot, because there are roles that every single person on the ballot will play, from your state legislature, your house, your state Senate, all of those folks down to your DA and your county commissioners and your sheriffs and your police chiefs that affect the system all the way through. And so it's important that we continue to engage with as much information as we can, as much robust information we can, to make better decisions about who we put into those leadership positions.
And please say judges. Please say judges.
Oh, yes, and judges. I apologize. And absolutely, our judges as well, because they do make a huge difference. Who you have as a judge makes. There have been studies that show judges of specific set of beliefs are more likely to impose sentencing that is longer than judges with other beliefs or with other issue stances. So it's really important that we know who our judges are. Thank you so much for that, Judge Kirk. And so this concludes this incredible panel. It has been amazing hearing from all of you amazing women. I think that the perspectives that we were given were just really have made me feel full about what is happening and what we can do next and what our audience can do to bring about some of these changes. So I'd like to share a sincere gratitude on behalf of Spelman College and the Spelman community for this wonderful panel discussion, the critical thoughts that you brought to bear, and also a thank you to our fantastic audience members who brought us some really thoughtful questions. We want you to ensure that you know about all the Spelman Speaks series. The next Spelman Speaks, that is a tongue twister. The next Spelman Speaks will be on Tuesday, September 21st at 5 p.m. We hope that you will continue to join us and engage with us and let your voice and your questions be heard. Until then, let's continue the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Spelman Speaks. And we will end with a clip from Dr. Johnson's Georgia Incarceration Performance Project. Thank you for joining us this evening. Have a great day.